inviting me here. I'm Zsofia. I'm a student at New York University, Abu Dhabi, and I'm the co-founder of FGS. We are a nonprofit providing free education for high school students. We organize free online summer programs for high school students. It's our fourth year now, and yes, I am supposed to ask some questions from everyone. So, Kasia, I heard you are in the medical device industry, if that's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Can you talk a bit about that? Like, I don't know. I'm very interested in what medical devices you work with, and yeah, just like about some of the unique challenges you face in the health tech startup industry.
I will very gladly talk about it. And I think, as you know, medical devices is a very broad category. It could be a consumer-facing small device, like a wearable smartwatch, right? Or an Aura ring. It is a very, very low class device. Low class classes are related to the risk level for patients. So very low risk level device, but at the same time, because it's not regulated by any regulatory authorities, it really cannot make any, the manufacturers cannot make any claims that it actually prevents any diseases, or if it actually, the diagnostic that it provides in terms of heart rate and things like that has any medical value. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. Then we go through different classes of medical devices up to the highest level. And the higher levels are regulated by regulatory authorities, meaning that they have to actually prove that they work. They have to prove that they are not unsafe for patients. And therefore, the higher you go with these classes of medical devices, the more time it takes to actually prove, create all these data and proofs for regulatory authorities like FDA or other geographies. So medical devices almost like are divided into these groups that don't have to be regulated. So you can put them on the market pretty fast, but you then spend a lot of marketing dollars to differentiate them because the quality of data behind are not sufficient to make really medical claims, or it takes you much longer and much more money to actually get approved by FDA and other regulatory authorities. This leaves you the opportunity to make some very strong claims, but then it takes much longer to put it on the market and takes much more money to get the right clinical data. So I think that's a challenging field in a sense that it's dealing with the health and human beings and our physiology. So the data generation process and the cost of it is a challenge. But otherwise, fascinating field and leading to many very interesting solutions.
Yeah, definitely. The thing you mentioned, I think CGMs, like continuous glucose monitors, yeah, those are also very interesting in this sense, because many of them are not really approved by any organizations. And yeah, people are buying them because they're cheaper from China or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. But then how the question always is how well validated they are.
Yeah,
right? Actually do what they say they do.
Yeah. And given your background in working with startups, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see early stage founders in the healthcare space make?
I always say that commercialization starts early. And I think that's the biggest mistake I see. People don't think about commercialization until they actually have a product. And then they start finding out that the product does not fully fit the market. and the unmet needs that they wanted to address. So my message is commercialization starts as early as you set up your company and think about the unmet need and the product. That's, in my opinion, the biggest mistake.
Thank you.
Because in our space, we have a lot of founders who have engineering or scientific background. And maybe they have never commercialized anything in their previous jobs. So there may be some not full appreciation of how commercialization strategy actually influences the product development.
Is that what you work with? Like that's your
That's
job?
my area of expertise. Yes, exactly. To really start early and kind of show the founders that they really have to think about, is it a B2C type of product? Is it a B2B type of product? Who will use it? Because this all defines what kind of data, what kind of product features they need, and if they're developing, for example, a drug, what kind of data they have to generate in their research and development process to be a better fit for the market, for example, convince payers to reimburse it, convince physicians to prescribe it. This is all done in the product development stage.
That also raises some ethical questions, right? And I mean legal questions. So how do you usually address those?
Can you tell me a little bit more specific? Because there are I agree there are lots of ethical and legal questions. So tell me a little bit more about what do you have in mind?
Yeah, so for example, doctors in many countries are not allowed to, you are not allowed to talk to them and say that, oh, hey, I have this business, we have a great product, please prescribe my products, not our competitors. So if you cannot do that, then what can you do? And will you still,
a manufacturer, when the product is approved, and only when the product is approved, a manufacturer is allowed to talk to physicians and promote the product. Outside of the US and a handful of other countries, manufacturers are usually not allowed to talk to patients. And I think that's where the constraints are. So, but even in the United States, where we can talk to patients directly, there's no point in talking to patients and physicians don't support the product. Because then a patient usually needs a prescription or needs a way to get to the product. And, frequently these medical products are not sold in regular stores. So we always need to convince physicians first. And from this point of view, it's also a very specific marketing effort because there's a lot of medical education happening around the newly launched products and not maybe your classical advertising and promotion. And then once the physicians are convinced they've seen enough data to show efficacy and tolerability of the product and how the product is really helping them to treat certain patient conditions, then they start using it, and then a patient starts having access to it. So even if we promote to patients and physicians are not on board, it still wouldn't work.
Yeah. So what are some of the most promising areas of innovation that you see in the healthcare technology sector?
There are many, but I can only tell you about the ones that I kind of looked at. Because I am, for example, not so much into robotics. I don't work with any company that develops robotics. This is a very interesting area, and I know that it's developing fast, but I can't talk about it too much. I am mostly in the area of software applications that help kind of combine the AI, so generative AI and natural language processing, plus elements of behavioral sciences to help patients manage their diseases in different ways. So I think that this is a very interesting field because both behavioral sciences and AI advanced enough in the recent years that they can really create breakthroughs. For example, help patients manage chronic diseases or deliver therapies for patients with depression and anxiety. And these applications they will not replace physicians or therapists, but they are a great companion that can help patients in between the visits, or because the visits are sometimes too short to answer questions, they can deliver, disease education, they can deliver, it can do reminders, they can deliver certain levels of gamification to motivate patients to do certain things. And finally, highly sophisticated chatbots can actually answer a lot of questions. So obviously it has to have to be trained on solid data to do that. But I think the combination of all these things is finally creating solutions that can truly be a breakthrough in the management of chronic diseases. And I think that's what I'm probably the most fascinated with.
Yeah, those really sound promising, and some emerging fields. And I mean, yeah, AI, it's very popular now. So, are there a lot of investors interested, or how is the investor? Um,
There is high level of interest,
mhm.
yes. And I think investors also are fascinated with AI and what it can do. And I think that all of us who are in this field, we obviously understand the guardrails and the need for very strong cybersecurity and privacy. However, once these potential risks are taken into consideration and properly addressed, the AI can do a lot of magnificent things. I think that what we always need to remember is that in healthcare, it always depends on what data the AI is trained on. So we are not, I, for example, don't recommend to use the regular publicly available ChatGPT for healthcare. I am more into developing very specific algorithms for very specific use cases, and then training these algorithms on data that are specific to these use cases. So that obviously taking into consideration also some biases that may exist in our data. So I think that's if this approach is taken, and then there is a high level of human supervision, at least at the beginning, so that we are sure that AI was trained properly, then it can really make a difference. And yes, investors are very interested in AI. It's actually, sometimes I advise the startups that I work with to, if they use AI, to actually highlight it specifically in their pitch decks, because the level of interest is so high that everybody is drawn to solutions that use AI. And it's, a bit of a fashion right now, and there is high level of enthusiasm. But, as founders, we have to build on that interest and make sure that each time when we do something with AI, we actually highlight it to investors so that they are aware.
Yeah, exactly. So my next question comes here. So if someone from our audience wants to start a healthcare startup, what would you tell them? What should they do? What should they not do? Share your tips and tricks, please.
So I think this the healthcare startup founders, first and foremost, they should seek incubators, accelerators, and investors who specifically work in this space. Other than maybe very low risk applications that are kind of B2C solutions. I've seen a lot of a lot of funds, venture capital funds, and angel investors actually shying away from healthcare because it does not give them sufficiently fast returns on their investment. So if you try to pitch to a venture capital or even an angel investor with your healthcare startups, and it is not the lowest risk B2C solution, you really need to find people who work in this space, because they have, usually their funds have more money, and they are usually used to longer timelines that are specific for healthcare. And that's what I would recommend, to really work within your space so that you work with people who understand.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Uh,
you. Great
yeah.
questions.
Yeah, do we have any questions from the participants? Maybe, I don't know. George, if you have anything. Or if no, then we can move on to Gathoni. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, you are. It's TH like in the, so Gathoni. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you are a community lead at Afripods, right?
I am.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the challenges and opportunities of building a community around a new startup?
Sure. I think the challenges that we face, especially because in my position, I'm trying to build community across the continent. Um, One of the challenges is trying to figure out how every pocket of Africa, because Africans are very, we're alike but very different at the same time. So it's trying to figure out how do I represent East Africa in the same way I represent West Africa, but keep the nuances that make us who we are as part of what the community is, and then where are the spaces that we can bring all of that together. So is it Lusophone Africa, is it Francophone Africa, South Africa? Are we talking about development? We have languages that we have to consider, because if you think about like my country, we have over 40 languages that people speak in Kenya alone. So if we then put it to the number of countries we have on the continent and how many other things we have to consider, those are some of the challenges. So what I think has been helpful for me is being trying to figure out the nucleus in every little space. So what is the thing that makes East Africans come together, and what's the thing that makes West Africans come together, or the MENA region? And then once you have the little pockets of community, what is it that now you can talk to the leaders who are in those spaces and figure out how do we then bring them all together to figure out what it is that we can present to them, what are the needs? Because we're dealing with podcasts, it's storytelling, it's IP, it's things like that. So what are the considerations we have to put in every country? We're trying to get them paid for their content. What does that look like in every country, and what are the considerations we need to make? So on challenges, it's just how different and alike we are, and trying to find spaces to make us remain unique but still find our similarities. Um, but then I think there's a beauty in it. So I don't know that it's really a challenge. It's more just a nuance, something that I have to think about and just figure out. But it's really exciting. But on the benefits, I think it's being able to tell our stories also. I feel for a long time we haven't had the space to be able to tell our stories, or the ability to tell them how we want to tell them. And I think podcasting presents a medium where it doesn't have as much of the rules yet that govern every other media. If it's radio, there's specific things you can do. We have like laws around it. If it's like television, you also have a lot of laws you have to consider. There's something that podcasting allows for people to do. It allows us to do it, let's say, in vernacular as well, and just get into our little pockets of stories that we need to tell. So it's really exciting to be in the space.
Yeah. So do you work with startups or businesses, or is it something more personal?
So we are a startup. Afripods is a startup. We are a hosting and distribution platform that is focused on the African audio stories and African creatives. So what we're doing is basically what other hosting platforms have done, but because we understand that the stories are not necessarily given priority on the other platforms, will not rank on like Spotify or Apple, that kind of thing. There's no consideration given to our stories. It's also understanding the type of data access our people have. So what we've done is built a technological option for African creatives. And what we're doing is, as we build the tech, we're going to the podcasters and finding out what it is they need, and actually building something that would be specifically for them based on what it is they need. So, for example, we had a podcaster say they want to know where the drop off rate is. We went to the tech team, talked to them, figured out how to build that into the system. We know that editing is an issue. A lot of people don't have access to like an editor. we went in and got an editor system that they can access again for free, because we're offering it as a free solution, because based on who it is we're serving, it's the best option for them to be able to tell their stories. So we're now trying to figure out getting all of the funding for that, so that we're able to continue to build and do all of that, so that they're able to continue getting the solution for free, while telling their stories, which is what we want to get them to do.
Yeah, that's great. So
Yeah.
you want them to tell it to, Africa, or you want it to go more global?
It's actually global, because what we're doing as a hosting platform is we're not expecting for them to just put their podcasts on our platform. So in the same way any other podcasting platform has distribution options, we give you an RSS. So the podcasts that are hosted on Afripods are available on whatever listening platform they want, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast that's about to go down, these are whatever platform people listen on, you're able to have access to those spaces. So it's global in that sense, because you see, if you think about companies like, let's say, Spotify is not available in every country in Africa. So not all Africans can access that, but those who can get it on Spotify. But Spotify is available globally. So if you make sure your podcast is there, whatever you're speaking about is available to a global audience. So we're not trying to have them keep the information just for Africans. What we're trying to do is create a platform for Africans that prioritizes them and their needs, and then allow them to tell their stories globally. Because the other thing is, we have a huge global audience of Africans who have gone, who are expatriates basically. And a lot of them are looking for information from back home. And so they're an amazing audience to get to. And so what we've done, even with the app, is create a space where if I download the app, I know everything that's on the app um, is an African story or an African creator or an African in the diaspora. And then you're able to do things like filter using countries. If you want to do it with language, we have over 50 local languages available. So you're able to filter and find exactly what it is you need, and you feel like that sense of home. So we're not trying to keep it in Africa. We're just trying to build a space for basically Africa to the world, um, but on Africa's terms. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Um, so how can people leverage the power of the community you are building?
I would say go onto our platform, afripods.africa. If you go on there, you're able to access or upload your podcast and do all of that. We have community events that we plan virtually and in person. We have, for example, one coming up next week and the week after with BBC, where we're educating. Because the thing we've realized is a lot of the people in the space in Africa, technology we have to teach. Podcasting is very new as a medium on its own, but then in addition to that, we have to teach what it looks like. What is a podcast? How do I upload it? What are the things I can get access to and things like that? So in being part of the education, we're getting people who have been in the space. BBC is very big with podcasts at the moment and has always been. So they have a podcast called Dear Daughter. It's by a Kenyan, and she had won it as part of, they had done a call for podcasts. And so it became an award-winning podcast. So we're able to go back to her and ask her, okay, so what was the journey like? What did you guys have to consider? What does it look like to make quality content? And then bring it to the people who don't necessarily have access to the BBC or to the host of Dear Daughter, for example. So it's creating bridges, I think, more is what we're doing. So if you follow Afripods everywhere, you should be able to see what it is we're doing. Yeah, because we try and make it as accessible to as many people as possible. We have in-person events that we do in Nairobi as well, which is where we're based. And for those, again, we just put them online. We have partners like Baraza Media Lab, which is a very good space that has given us a lot of grace and allowed us to come into the space and do a lot of events in the space, and they'll provide whatever it is you need. They'll give you the space for free or very low amount and things like that. So they've created a space for creatives to exist. So finding partners like that who can help us and the mission that we're trying to be on of growing African storytelling and being able to access the podcasters. And then once the bridges are created, giving them to the podcasters. So if they follow Afripods everywhere or go to our website, afripods.africa, they'll get all the information that they need.
Yeah. And then I guess you're doing some sort of mentorship, right? We could call it mentorship.
It could be called mentorship. I feel like it's a bit possibly broader because we're trying to figure out our main aim is tech. So we're trying to give a tech solution, but in giving a tech solution, I know Kasia was saying it earlier where she says you can build, but if you build for the patients and reach out to them directly, if the doctors aren't on board, then you're really wasting a lot of your time in what it is you're trying to present. And it's the thing that we're having from our side, where it's now we can build the tech, but if the people don't understand how the technology works, we've spent a lot of time and wasted a lot of time in building the technology for them. So then we have to enter the space of education in order to allow them to understand why it's important or how to tell the stories or what they have access to. And in that sense, we remain a technology solution, and that's our primary focus. But we have to figure out, I guess, like Kasia was saying, who's the doctor in our story and how do we get access to the doctor so that then the patients are able to come. And so for us, the doctor would be the podcaster, and being able to reach out to the podcaster and figure out what is it your needs are. What do I need to build in the technology? What do I need to do? You need AI, for example, for editing? Does that help you make it easier? It's going to media station, radio stations, and finding out if we record, if we give you a solution that can pick your recording and put it on the platform, does it make it easier for you to just then come in and edit down, right? They say, yes, we build a solution we have for broadcast to podcast. So it's just trying to figure out that. But because we're new in a medium that is new, we kind of have to do a bit of everything in order to make the technology make sense. So it could be mentorship, but I think it's more education. And then because Africans were very community oriented, we've always been very community oriented. It's that thing of we need to go to work, so my neighbor's at home, I leave my child with my neighbor because I didn't have any, that kind of thing. So even in growing, it helps to have other people who help with education. So if say George has a podcast, which I know he does, and then he understands something, if I put him in a space with someone who's just starting, who can ask the question, my mic isn't doing this thing, how do I? And George is able to come and say, oh, check this, and this. So it's how do we get those spaces? Because until those spaces are created and they can access each other, we can't build the industry, right? So who is it we need to get as the touch points? Who's our George in every space? Who will then help us get the people together? Who then we can get to them and be like, okay, what do you need? And then we provide the tech solution. So yeah, a bit of mentorship, but a lot of education as well.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Yeah, George told me that in your role at Afripods, you connect with a lot of entrepreneurs in Africa. So, what are some of the unique challenges and opportunities facing African startups? What would you say?
I think African startups have, I guess it's the same thing. It's funding, trying to figure out how do I present myself. A lot of startups here, I don't know if it's a lack of trust for Africans, and I can't understand where it came from. But a lot of startups feel like they have to have someone different other than an African as the head in order to attract funding. It's very unfortunate. But we have gotten spaces now that are giving us funding. The HIVA Fund has become very good with this. They provide a lot of money for especially people in the creative spaces. I think it becomes hard. I think it's an education thing as well for startups where how do I present what I have and make it attractive to a funder? I feel like a lot of times the education on how to get the money doesn't trickle down to us necessarily. I mean, Kasia has been in the space probably for a really long time. I'm not sure how many like African startups you've worked with, We have to think about accessibility. How much money can they do they have available to be able to get services for someone who actually has the knowledge? We don't know how many people have that kind of accessibility. So then It's just small things like that, little limitations. It's not that they're not startups or good ones that deserve the funding. It's just accessibility. How do they get to the funders? How do they present to the funders? A lot of creatives trying to figure out, how do I make the idea in my head that's not tangible? It's not a product, it's creativity. How do I package creativity to be funded? We have a play. This play can do this, and this, and this. How do I get that funded? Because there's ways that you can still make that in the startup space. So I think those are the challenges, but we have gotten better and we are getting funds in the space that are focused more on the African startups. We've also gotten, we were sitting, there's a town hall I was at the other day, and someone said the other thing is a lot of times funders want to give a lot more money than a lot of our startups are able to handle at the beginning. So it limits also who they have access to at the beginning. So it's, how do we grow our startup to the point that then they become attractive to the funders who actually have the large amounts of money? Do we need to figure out a way where we make collections of startups and be like, as a collective, they can access all the money that you have to bring it on board to these 3 or 4 startups? We're trying to figure that out. But I think it's a good place to be, because I feel like, if nothing else, Africans are resilient, and I've seen a lot of change in different things, a different way of doing a lot of things versus what we have in the West. Say, for example, in the movie world, because we don't have access to theaters, I've seen people create apps where you can get the exact movie and you watch it at home, but then you pay the ticket price, right? So you're still able to keep the flow and everyone's able to get their money, but then it's more accessible for the people in the homestead. So it's trying to figure out, what does that look like for startups? What's the adjustments we need to make so that they know how to access the funders? I think also some funders don't know that the startups exist. So how do we get the communication circle complete so that they can find each other? And yeah, I think once that's done, the startups are great. The ideas and entrepreneurs that we have in the space, they have really good ideas and very unique, because I think we have a unique perspective in a lot of things just because of how we've grown up in the spaces we're in. So we have access to internet and everything, but how we perceive the world is just a bit different. And so it offers an amazing opportunity for funders as well. So I'd say, if you're a funder, check out Africa. Just come in and look what's happening here. But if you're a person in startups and you want to educate, try and find like find entrepreneurs who need the education and give your time for free. CSR.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, then I guess I will give George.
So yeah, yeah. So I think we have Irini joining us. She's the founder of Vertigo, and also she has a podcast. So I think she'll be joining us. So
Hello,
hi.
can you see me?
Yeah,
Yes, we can see you.
Ah, okay.
So okay. So let me this question is for Irini. So as a Vertigo, you can give us a small introduction to what Vertigo does, and maybe like now go deeper. As a podcast, you have interviewed various successful founders across the world. So I'll just ask it in a kind of, how many women successful entrepreneurs have you seen during your interviews, and what have you learned as a women entrepreneur yourself?
Hi, nice to meet you. I feel so blessed to be around so many amazing women entrepreneurs. I'll just give a little bit of context about Vertigo. It's a project that I started by interviewing people that I found interesting in my university in the library. And it's something that I then developed in an internship that I had at Amazon Web Services through some research on investor profiles as well as early stage startup environments. And then it's something that I then took on internationally by seeing that I could connect investors with startups through the thesis that's founder psychology, through the investment thesis that founder psychology is at times more important than financial metrics potential. Or at least it's an added filter that is worth considering. So that's a little bit what Vertigo is about. I could go on and on with more explanation. Maybe I'll do that later, but that's the gist of it. And actually, I'm glad that you asked that question because in terms of the amount of women entrepreneurs that I interviewed, I was saddened to see that there wasn't much representation of women entrepreneurs in conferences, especially because it's easier to kind of try to find women entrepreneurs on your own. That's like it's easier to stay equal in that regard because it's you who's looking. But in the conferences that I went to, I was very saddened to see for example, I went to this one really famous startup conference, South Summit in Madrid a few weeks ago. I had to try to interview a girl and it was one out of the 17. So honestly, I've been really like negatively surprised. And as a woman entrepreneur myself, um I have been scolded at times, mostly for my age. I'm 22, so I'm seen as a little girl when I go to conferences with 50-year-old like Spanish men. But also as a woman, like I actually had an experience earlier this week where they called me like hi beautiful like at an MVP presentation and they like held my waist. So I think that I'm not the type to be like I'm not the typical sort of advocate. I'm not always like, oh yeah, I don't like complaining about this sort of stuff because I see it as kind of an advantage that we might have to really differentiate ourselves as women individuals. But it saddens you when you do experience it. And statistically, in terms of my experience and going all around the world, um, that's what I've seen. Oh, sorry.
So so this is also a question to Zsofia. So Zsofia is kind of doing.
I think you froze a bit, George. Maybe you can type it in the chat.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. So this is a question to the full panel. So how has community, because as a founder myself, I'm also building a community with my podcast, and also like for the startup that I'm doing. So how has community been an important thing in building and growing your startup? And also like is it like a trend that you have seen that for founders building podcast or communities? So we can start with Zof.
Yeah, I mean it's very important, and I would say I had the chance to meet a lot of amazing people, very smart people, and it's a great chance to collaborate with each other. I mean, it's basically our story, George, right? Like we
Yes.
collaborated through that, and now I'm here. Svetoslav, the co-founder of my nonprofit, was on your podcast, and now you're in August. You are coming to FGS, right? So
Yes.
yeah, and I mean now it's like a chain reaction because you are introducing me to all these other beautiful, amazing people. So maybe we can collaborate sometime, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing, truly.
So, Irini, how have you seen community impact your startup?
If you don't mind, like elaborating the question a little bit, what do you
Yes.
mean by community specifically?
So, so through the interviews that you have done with your podcast, obviously you have had this audience. So this audience has been your community, right? So with your startup, with your mission, how has the audience of your community been a key part of you, and a key kind of inspiration to do more of the podcast and maybe address the challenge that you are kind of solving. But
Thank you. Actually, it's been key. It's been what allowed me to monetize it. The podcast started as interviews to interesting people and then got a little bit more specific towards entrepreneurs. The audience of it obviously kept me motivated. Like there's the startups that I interviewed themselves then collaborated with each other, which was beautiful to see. But more than anything, investors started noticing it and said, "Wait, we like this investment thesis. We want early access to the entrepreneurs that you're interviewing before you release them. We want a list of names or we want to see the interviews. And then we want to do funding rounds with them." And that's how everything it if it weren't for the community, I wouldn't have had a business model at all. So that's my answer to that.
amazing, amazing, amazing. So we can go to Gathoni. So with Afripods, I saw something that Afripods is like the like African platform for podcasters. So how have you seen the podcasting community in Africa, and how have you experienced any startup founders who are joining Afripods to start building their community? And maybe you can give us like a real world example where this founder has been able to build this startup. As you said, the challenge was like we don't have a plat. We have a challenge in building like our solutions the way that we want. So how has that community, using like a podcast to build something the way that they want to? So how have you seen Afripods help that, and maybe like now having an audience on my back when I'm building this, being able to help founders see their ideas clearly and the solutions that they're willing to build in a better way.
Okay, I don't know that we've had any experience yet with founders or entrepreneurs that have had like Irini, apologies, had high experience where um, you start something and it ends up being a business. I haven't heard of anything. I'm not saying it hasn't happened on the continent, but I haven't heard of anything specifically in that sense. Um, a lot of podcasters currently who are getting into the space are more talk podcasts. We do have business podcasts. Some companies are coming in now, like doing law firms and things like that, presenting what it is they have and using it as a funnel to get people into what it is that they already have as an established business. But I don't know that I've seen it go the opposite way, where it's someone who starts something that ends up being a startup or a business in that sense. However, well, not in the startup sense, but I have seen it become a business. So Community has built the APVA Awards in Nigeria. It's the African Podcaster and Voiceover Artist Awards. This is the third year it's going to be happening, and slowly we're building a space where now awards are a thing that we're doing. So that's a business that people can tap into and people can support and people can give money. We've seen a lot of podfests happening. Malawi has had a podfest. Cairo podfest will probably have its fifth one next year. There was Africa Podfest who are doing the data and everything. So there's little pockets of people who are doing things. There's festivals coming up. South Africa just had a podcast and music festival. We're going to have an Africana Women Festival for podcasting in Zambia. So in the little pockets, they are versions of businesses coming up, but not necessarily as startups. But it's trying to fill the spaces that podcasters need. Where do they come and learn? Where do they come and get touch points? Like I was mentioning earlier, what are the bridges that allow podcasters to get in touch with like the editors and the producers and understand the quality and do all of that? So I think more the business is around creating spaces for accessibility and recognition. So with the awards and the podfests and the festivals, that's more what it is. Because like I said earlier, podcasting is still, it's fairly new on the global scale, but it's really new here. So the people who are trying to figure it out, it's media houses trying to figure out digitizing. They're already established businesses, but they want to see how do we access Gen Z who doesn't listen to radio. So do we need to create a podcast? Do we need to do something like that? So it's more in that sense, branching out of the businesses that exist. But I don't know that I've seen a startup. Again, not saying it doesn't happen. I just don't know anything myself personally.
Yes, yes. That's a cool business case and a cool use case now that we are going to be seeing in the Africa kind of startup. So my now coming to Kasia, right? I really like the experience that you have in the pharmaceutical and medtech kind of career. And you kind of mentioned something cool where you said how your work is like helping people commercialize in the early stage. So my question will come like first of all to adjust that. So maybe what was your journey towards your own commercialization? Um, as a scientist, like did that challenge you at the beginning? And now now coming to the second part of the question about the community, like as a founder, you have like now your clients, right? The entrepreneurs that you're helping go to them commercialize their ideas. So how has that community building been now, because the use case is different now. It's not on a scientific kind of level. It's kind of a business. So how has that community building been, and maybe has there been challenges to build a community in the pharmaceutical kind of space?
Yes, thank you very much for these questions. So I maybe would start by saying that I am a physician, and I worked as a clinical physician for a couple of years, but as a young physician, I joined pharmaceutical industry indeed. And I think that it did require a lot of education on my part to understand the principles of business, all of it: financing, pricing, human resources, commercialization. But I think that for physicians and scientists, the way to think about commercialization in healthcare is really equal with adoption. We want our innovations to be adopted by physicians and patients, right? So the adoption is commercialization. And I think the same rules apply. What do I need to do to make sure that this solution is actually helping as many patients as possible? And in healthcare, there are already mechanisms to facilitate that, to enable that. For example, in healthcare, there are many medical societies that issue guidelines. There's so much science out there. There's so many different solutions, different drugs and medical devices, that for an individual physician to actually sort through scientific papers that are published every year. You know that we publish almost 1 million scientific papers per year in medical field. So even for a physician who is highly specialized, sorting through this new science is extremely challenging. Now AI helps with this sometimes, but we also have medical societies and some governmental agencies that decide what is the right way of treatment in different fields. So making sure that so the adoption starts with really sharing data of a given product with all these different decision makers and influencers, and then finally educating prescribers, physicians, nurses, who are in charge of patients directly. And I think for a physician, this is something very natural, because as physicians, we used to work with these guidelines, right? We used to attend medical education. So kind of being on the other side of it in the past helped me to do it when I was in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. So that's, I think, answering you, but it did require a lot of learning. I completely agree. And I think that's a given. If you enter a new field, there is a lot of learning always. I ended up, so the way how I help the startup companies, I actually ended up developing my own commercialization framework that is specifically suited for people with more scientific and medical and engineering backgrounds. I basically show them how some principles that they use in science are actually useful in commercialization of their products. So it's not completely, I try to build bridges between these different fields. So that's kind of one area. Then the second question you asked was about a community. And so first and foremost, there are already some communities for pharmaceutical and medical device founders and startups. They are usually created in places where there are big hubs. So we have some on East Coast, some on West Coast. Now the challenge is if you live somewhere else, right? And I think that's actually my case. I don't live on East Coast or West Coast right now in the United States. So the challenge is to start building these online communities. And I think that for me, there were basically a few things that worked. One is LinkedIn. I do a lot of searches on LinkedIn. I try to find these startup founders in healthcare space. I try to get to know them. It does not translate into immediately selling my services or anything like that. I just try to make sure that we know each other. And they can benefit from some things that I post. They may benefit from some, I have a newsletter where I write about things. So people can just benefit from things that I share and post, and I can benefit from things that they share and post. So I think that's kind of a very loose community of people on LinkedIn. And then I try to connect with some organizations that already created these communities. And there are, in the United States, there are some organizations for women in healthcare, for women in biotechnology. So I am trying to be a member of those, and in this way, kind of interact with people who are interested in similar things that I am.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. Perfect answer.
I don't know if it's perfect. That's how I try to do it. But I also have a question for Irini and Gathoni, if I can.
Yes.
You are doing a lot of such a fabulous job in actually creating these communities of founders. And maybe I can ask you, how can I amplify what you do? What is the best way to amplify what you do, to share what you do?
Um, that's a very good question. A lot of times, what I tell people is, let me know what it is you have access to, and then I know how to plug you into the communities. Because, like you're saying, if it's medical and I know that's the field, then I know when someone comes to me and they need something in the medical field and
Yeah.
they're trying to go to startup and everything, I'd be like, oh, I know a person. Because, like I said, the idea, I am a bridge, and basically I'm like, oh, I have an advantage of access. I don't take it for granted. I've been very fortunate with the people, like, for example, on this platform, I've met each of you. And so now if I meet someone who's like, how do I make my podcast into a business? I'd be able to reach out to you and be like, hi, there's someone here who's trying to figure out how to do what it is you have done. And so I think it's more, if I understand what it is you're able or willing to give, are you willing to, let's say, do a masterclass for people who are founders in this space and try and figure out how to do commerce commercialization and try and figure that out. If that's something you're interested in, then I'll tell you, okay, tell me the type of people you're looking for and I'll find them for you and bring them into that space so that we give you exactly what it is you're able to offer and they're able to benefit as well, and basically create a new community around that.
Around
If
it,
it's
yeah.
exactly, so if it's you want to educate, if that's what you want to do, I can create the spaces for you to be able to do that. Like I was saying earlier, what we've done with BBC, they have the knowledge and I know the people who have them. We've done the same thing with there's a company in America called Afros and Audios, their festival for podcasting. What they did is give us access to all of their, I think this is their fifth year. They give us access to the past 4 years for free and
Okay.
all of the panels that they had. So then I'm able to offer it to community because now you can learn from these people who are in the space in a country that has been in podcasting more. So they know certain things that we have probably not considered yet. So it's giving them that kind of access. If I know someone who needs funding, then it's like, do you have access to funders? What do they need? Are you able to educate them on how to approach the founders, funders, and all of these things? So I feel like that's what you're able to offer, we will take, and I'll give you the right people to basically um, learn and gain from it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for offering. It's amazing. I love it. Thank you.
No, I think we need to amplify each other. I think, as you know, as the first speaker said, we only get 2% of funding as women founders, right? Even though we are between 40 and 50%, depending on the region. So
Yeah.
what do we do about that, right? I think
Sure.
at least we can amplify our voices and make sure that we collectively get louder.
Sure. And then the money will come.
Some of the money will come, and then again, in the United States, there are already organizations that specifically focus on women founders, and I'm thinking that this is probably the natural way of the market developing eventually. In other places there will be organizations like this as well. And then another point might be connecting founders between with investors across different continents. I have a feeling that we work very much in silos. There's a venture capital that invests in the US, and then there's a venture capital that invests in Europe. I've met very few, or maybe there's another one in Africa, that I've met very few that actually work globally. So that's also an interesting observation, and I think that could change in the future. I hope it does.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you guys are saying this. And also, Gathoni, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Mhm.
In terms of enhancement and like community, I joined a bunch of, because I'm still in university. I haven't finished yet. I don't know how my connection is. I feel like I'm a bit wonky. But there's a bunch of, in the US especially, there's a bunch of communities like Girls Who VC is a community that was started by a girl that is in Harvard, and it's spread out through the Ivy Leagues. And so that has been helping a lot in terms of promoting funding for early stage college students that are women. But in terms of the global point that you made, I agree. That's actually, you know how like when you start a company or when you start an initiative, everyone's like, no, 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 you should master your project in your region first. And that's a huge thing that I was worried about, is that I haven't mastered any region. I haven't mastered any to a specific a skill to take on. And actually, it was when I went to Kenya and met George, and when we went to this conference, that I realized that there was some very unique value in being able to connect early stage entrepreneurs and early investors across the world, because there's just so many startups trying to expand into a different region, so many even early stage startups that have just began that could benefit from an investor from another continent. And it was really sort of seeing the value in this globalization of negotiation, deal flow, communication. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I thought that it was a limitation, because we're taught that you should really master your regions before you're able to expand. And I don't think that's true. I think that if you are able to connect one deal in Asia with a deal in Kenya, Nairobi, or with a deal in Europe or the United States, there's actually a lot of value in it.
Yes,
So,
I agree.
and in terms
Um,
of, sorry, and to answer your question in terms of community, I think in terms of enhancing what we're already doing, I think that that is done better through community building on social media. Like, that's what we're trying to do now. I was very focused on the quality of the long form interviews up until this point, because I actually wanted to offer a conversation. But in terms of building and adding to the community through like more and more people, we're developing reels at the moment out of like the long form content that we've made. We are creating a website, being more active on LinkedIn. And lastly, with your LinkedIn point, the way that I met all of these founders was, if I was traveling to one place, I would look up founder and put the location 5 days before going there. And I would message them saying, I would love to meet you. So LinkedIn is the biggest community tool professionally that exists. Like, if it hadn't been for LinkedIn, I wouldn't have been able to expand globally. Maybe I would have been able to do a few interviews locally through recommendations, but never to this degree. So yeah.
Thank you. These are great points. And, I want to tell you that there are some very nascent initiatives, and they are specific to healthcare. So that I am actually part of one of those initiatives. It's called Global Health Innovation Exchange, that we are actually in the process of building a global incubator for healthcare startups. I will put the link to the website in the chat. We also have a LinkedIn page. So these are some, again, it's a very nascent initiative, and I'm not aware of too many other like that, especially, of course, not in other sectors, because I don't work in other sectors. But I think the point of doing something locally or regionally before going global, I don't think this is right, because otherwise we will continue working in silos. And there are so many innovations that can be applicable across the continents. Even if something is developed in Africa, it's perfectly fine to introduce it into the market in the United States or Europe, because patients have a very similar unmet needs. Some of them are very, very specific to the regions, but most of them actually are not. So I don't see a reason to work in silos, by the way.
Yes. This let me kind of expand more about community, right? And it goes hand in hand with what you guys are saying, because as a founder myself, for me, the first thing that before now I pivoted to like what I'm actually working. What I worked on before was like building a platform to bring like-minded people together to solve issues in our society through innovative ideas and a podcast to raise awareness. So the first thing we had was a community, and for this idea that we're having at the moment, I could fully agree with what Kasia is saying, that it's not okay to just build one region, because for me, I was building as a software, right? So my first user was not from Kenya. So my first user was from Nigeria. So through communities, I think it is easier to find people who are like very interested in what you're doing, and that as a founder will give you the right motivation, and also like um, it helps a bit like make your idea more clear, because these people are able, like to grasp like what I'm doing in another kind of way, and their interest for this idea to make it work actually it added value to what I'm working. So I think that's for someone who is in the early stage, that that is usually very important, so that you get very high like feedback on what you're doing, and also you're able now to pivot to build. So building a community it is it is kind of also your responsibility as the founder to talk about what you're building. So that's also like something that if people want to raise awareness about now, like the startups, they should talk more about what they're building, maybe the problem, how it affects the people. Then now, like you can be able like now to sell your solution. Maybe you can be able like now to talk about what your solution will be able to do for these people, in order like now to get people maybe to to get to maybe get to a waiting list or something like that, and this will actually help.
I think I'm losing connection. Is anybody else?
Yeah.
I think George has some
And
connectivity issues.
yes,
George, you froze for a while.
well, I'm saying that's my take on community.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing we have some questions from Linda. So she asked, what are the biggest challenges in engaging and retaining your audience? So I think Gathoni can answer this.
I think the biggest challenges in retaining or engaging your audience is trying to find where they are. I feel like a lot of times people don't take time to do the research before to figure out who their audience is and where they exist and how do you find them. And so then once you've gotten your product or your podcast or whatever it is out, it becomes a thing of, I'm not getting streams. Why isn't anyone listening? A lot of times it's where are the people who you are creating the thing for, and how do you access them. I know social media is a big thing, but sometimes social media doesn't work for certain things. You might be on TikTok and you're creating something for people who are on LinkedIn. Are you on LinkedIn as well? You have to consider where it is, who you want to reach out to is. Does it mean starting a WhatsApp community and doing a broadcast there? Do you need to go on Facebook and create a page or a group? You have to consider where it is the people who you're representing are, because then the thing about communities, once your people find you, retaining them is not an issue, because the reason they have come is because you're offering something that they need. So they stay because you continue to offer something that they need. So if you're consistent in what you're offering is, and you know who it is you're offering it to, and you're able to access them, then retaining them shouldn't be an issue. Figure out how to market as well. A lot of people at the beginning are not interested in marketing. They think because you have an amazing idea, and it's not that it's not an amazing idea, just because it's amazing doesn't mean it'll attract the people to it. Do the people know it exists in order for them to come to it? So figure out your marketing, figure out your consistency, figure out who your audience is and where they are. And once you figure out the right audience and customers, they stay. If what it is you're giving them is what it is they need, retaining them is not an issue that you need to consider necessarily.
Cool. I hope that answered your question, Linda. And she also had another question on the challenges that you face in attracting and retaining top talents, especially. Hello, am I audible?
You're back.
You're
Yeah.
back.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah.
so I'm sorry for my internet because it's failing. Okay, so I was saying she has another question, which is the challenges that you face in attracting and retaining top talent, especially women in STEM in digital fields like IT and cybersecurity. So I kind of feel like Kasia can answer this question regarding the team and how she has retained a team of top talent in women in STEM.
So I think the biggest challenge for startup companies to hire and retain top talent, and especially women in STEM, is the low job security level that they provide. And I think that what happens is that both men and women try to be in safe job environments, right? So if you are a startup, trying to hire people is challenging because they don't know how long you will be around. That's one. Now, once you hire them, the second biggest challenge that I've noticed is to offer them the right on-the-job development. If you are a big company and you have 100,000 people, there are many jobs that come along, many openings all the time, and a person who's been in a job for 2 or 3 years, they can always apply for another job and then for another job. Opportunities are bigger. Now, if you're in a startup, you usually hire a person for very specific job and very specific skills, but then there's very limited opportunity for a promotion. There are some, and especially in bigger startups, well-funded startups, but in early startups, practically no possibility to be promoted. You are doing what you are doing, and you are doing this for a couple of years. Now, what actually worked for me, and I saw it was successful, is to, especially in early startups, to hire very experienced people into the management team. Why? Because first and foremost, but then also allow them to hold their regular jobs. And this does limit a little bit what they can do for a startup, but people who have a day job, they don't expect necessarily that you pay them based on their a level of experience. You obviously should offer them the equity in the company, and they are more interested in equity and are maybe more passionate to bring something really breakthrough to the market, so that they can kind of keep the daily job and at the same time really add a lot of value to the startup. Now, if you want to hire people who are a little bit more junior, then you need to again allow them to do job part-time and allow them to also have some other source of income, because that's again, I'm talking about early startups. That's the way how startups frequently operate. And the more junior person may be still attracted because they learn a lot of very interesting skills. But then once they learn these skills, retaining them is always a problem because they want to continue learning, right?
Yes.
So I think many different strategies are possible here, but I think flexibility is the name of the game. Not regular employment, flexibility.
So, Zsofia, could you participate in that question? You as also as a founder of Future Generation Scientists, you have been able to interact with these top talent in various STEM industries. So, what is your take on that question?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Cassia said, and yeah, I don't fully have like this much experience in it, but yeah, I agree with that, and yeah, from what I see, many of the people I interact with, they have recently finished university, like their STEM degrees, or they are still in university, and honestly, they are starting their own businesses right now. That's what they are doing. They are not so interested in joining other people's startups, from what I see. Um, but yeah, otherwise, I completely agree with what Kasia said. Yeah.
Great, great. Um, so so we can start with this question for you again. So, what is your advice to young people who are interested in pursuing careers in science or STEM?
It's a question to me.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Uh, yeah. So I think it takes a lot of strength to study everything that you need to, and I would say be open and try to learn from, not be like, oh, I like chemistry, so I'm only going to learn chemistry and nothing else. So I think we should be a bit more open, um, and try to leverage those other fields in your field as well. Um, yes, I mean, STEM is a very, very hard field. So I would say that even if something doesn't go the way you expected it to go, don't be upset, because I think later in your life, if not right now, but later, you will find a way to do what you are passionate about, and find your niche. Right? You are gonna talk about that, George. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yes. Super great answer. And this now is a question to everybody in the panel. So, can everybody talk about why what they're passionate about, and how they think it is making an impact. So this we can start with you, Zophie, with future generation scientists. So uh, maybe you can talk about what you're passionate about future generation
Mhm.
scientists, and how you think it is making an impact.
Yes, so at FGS, we are, as I said, we are providing free education to high school students, and that's what we are passionate about. Because when me and the co-founder of FGS were high school students, we were really mm, we wanted to go to university abroad, and it's a really hard thing to do. The application, especially to the United States, it's completely different, and many people recommend that you go to summer programs that are organized by universities in the US. So it actually all started by me applying to one of these summer programs and not being accepted. And then I found this other person who was also not accepted, and we were like, why don't we just start our own um, summer program? So that's how it started. And these programs are usually very, very expensive. It can be like $6,000 to go to one of them, and especially in Eastern Europe, you cannot afford that. So we were just so passionate about providing that for free. And then it turned out that many, many people are interested in participating as high school students, and many people are interested in, teaching them. So we kind of built that bridge between them, and yeah, that's how FGS was born, and that's what we are passionate about.
So cool, cool. And also talk about the impact that you're creating, maybe how many students that have gone through the podcast, and maybe how many successful students are out there doing amazing stuff.
Yeah, so, well, this year is going to be our fourth. So we had three summer programs so far, each with like for all of them we had around like 200-250 applications, but because of the limitations of the online space, we could only accept around 100 students each year. So I would say we have 300 alumni, and this year we are going to have around 80 people who we have accepted so far. So these are the numbers, and yes, many of our past students have been accepted to great universities. Some of them are in medical school doing like top research, so really, really great results.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think now we can go to Irini. So talk about what you're passionate about. Talk about vertigo, and how you're seeing it make an impact.
Thank you. So, vertigo, the reason it's called vertigo is, I mean, what vertigo really means is that it's a fear of heights. But I redefine it as a fear to create, like a fear to really throw yourself into your idea. Um, where I've been lucky enough to pursue higher education in like a respected school, but something that was actually quite surprising to me in such a respected school was the fact that they were pushing certain career paths in finance and consulting a lot, and that I was meeting such brilliant minds with such amazing voices and like this sort of impulse to create and to do it with a strategic vision, because that shouldn't be forgotten. Like there's a lot of ideas going around, but if you don't have a strategic vision for it, they're not, I mean, I'm not going to say they're not worth anything, but they probably won't amount to what you want them to. And so my passion was to really bring voices to those, bring a voice to those ideas, and bring like make the people that had those ideas see the light in those ideas through strategic vision. So that's why I started Vertigo. It was really to just put a mic in front of people and say, okay, would you say this in a recording? And that was the first step for them to start their company. It's kind of like if you don't, the moment you say it, you do it. Or like there's a moment where you say it and you can't go back. So that's how it started. And that's what I'm passionate about.
So great. Talk about the impact that you see it creating, maybe like through the many interviews that you have had, maybe like how many successful like startups you have seen, and also like maybe the impact in the ecosystem, because you're involved in various ecosystems around the world. So how have you seen these interviews like maybe have an impact in this like kind of ecosystem?
I think that a lot of people, I mean, it's a blessing to be interviewed. Like I feel so blessed to, for example, when you offered that I be in this panel, it was like a motivator that, hey, maybe I'm doing something right. You know, it's always a blessing to have somebody see what you're doing and be like, I want to share with other people. So that alone, I think, is a huge motivator for the success and the motivation of a founder, which is at the end of the day what my thesis was. It was founder psychology is one of the most important factors at the earliest stage. I think that the way, like in terms of numbers and statistically, how successful the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed have been, that's kind of what birthed me continuing Vertigo. It started off being just something that I would do on my free time in college. And then suddenly I started realizing this weird correlation of this unusually high number, or this unusually high percentage of people that I would interview, not only starting their own company, but funding it successfully. Um, I don't know. I would have to like go back and look at my numbers to tell you a specific number, but it is close to, I would say, the 30%, which given the I haven't done that many interviews, like I've done less than 40 interviews. So I can, and a lot of the people that I've interviewed are still building, but around 30, a little bit, maybe a little bit less than 30% have already successfully built something that they can support themselves with and that there's a lot of potential in. So that's my answer to that question. And in terms of like the motivation side and how Vertigo has sort of helped them to grow their own company, I mean, I can give an example of this one guy that I met in Vietnam. No, I met him in Indonesia. And when I met him, he had decided to become a sole trader. He didn't want to be a broker at a larger company. He had sort of figured out a formula to trade stocks on his own that would always make him profit in like every week. Like it was like a weekly formula that would, at the end of every week, doesn't matter how much profit he make, but he would make some profit. And in order to sort of stabilize that, because he wanted to like be able to diversify his income, he started an academy where he would teach that to other people. And when I called him a few months ago, like 2 months ago, I was like, oh, how's the academy going? And he was like, it's not an academy anymore. My students did so well that I hired them and now I have a hedge fund. So it's just amazing to see all that. And more than anything, relating it back to the passion, I think that the early stage and startup world is probably one of the few worlds where you're going to see people talk about something with a light in their eye. Even in the hardest day, like they're going to be so excited about their project and believing in something and really wanting to make a change. And that's just something that motivates you as well to just keep bringing that to people. It's like I've worked in big tech, I've worked in big corp. You don't see that there. You really don't. So just having that around you is just such a breath of fresh air.
Cool. Definitely. that answer can touch somebody. So let's go to Gathoni, right? So Gathoni spoke about something really nice, that when you're African, there are many types. Like you can be in West Africa and South Africa. Yeah, we have kind of really different representations, but we are the same. So I would like to hear you talk about like maybe what you're passionate in in that perspective in maybe Africa, and maybe what impact you aim to bring with Afripods, and maybe what you are currently, the impact that you're making.
Okay, so what I'm passionate about is Africans being able to tell their stories on their terms. The one thing we can agree on as a continent is I feel like we've had our stories told to us a lot of times, and they're told with a very specific vision or image. Africa is poor and we need help and we need funding and then you exist in Africa. And like now I'm in Kenya, we've been having the protests recently, and it's all of these things that are happening where you see this is not the Africa you're presenting, but there's no space for us to be ourselves. Like, where's the space for me to tell about my experience, right? And not
Yeah,
to say that there's no poverty or whatever it is, but the thing is, there's poverty everywhere, I've been
yeah,
to America and I've walked past people in the streets sleeping in the streets. That's not shown, but then it's still a thing that happens there. So why is it a bigger deal that it's happening in my country than it's happening in Europe or America? Because again, in all those countries, I've had people beg, and I'm just like, why would you? I mean, you can't beg the African if that's not the image you're
yeah,
presenting. So I'm very, very passionate about being able to present the Africa I know to the world. And I think it's very important for the people. I always say the people who should tell Africa stories are the people who know her best. It's us who grew up here. It's going to visit my grandmother on the holidays with my cousins and having that experience, but at the same time, being able to live in an apartment with electricity, even though the world says, I've had people ask me, oh, how are you able to get on the call? Because of internet. The fact that in 2024 people don't understand that we have internet is concerning. So it's part of us being able to tell our stories, but educating the world on what you've been taught. And the thing is, I can't be mad at anyone because it's what you've been taught. If there's an image that's been presented to you all the time, that's all you know. And so it's, how do I present the Africa I know to the world? And that's why it's important for Afripods, because what we're doing is creating a platform for people to be able to tell those stories, whether it's a talk podcast with your friends and you're just going to kiki and laugh about the latest thing that happened in like pop culture. It's the fact that we have access to pop culture, so we have an opinion. It's talking about businesses. Is it founders coming in? What are the things we have here? What are the tech opportunities we have here if it's something like that? Is it businesses? Is it law? Are you trying to teach people about what is IP and everything in our context? Whatever it is, whatever it looks like, I think there needs to be a broader perspective of what it is people think of as our continent. Um, and so that the next time I meet someone, they're not like, oh, I was surprised I came to Kenya and you had a mall. Of course we have a mall. It's 2024. I'm just like, it is the thing that it's obvious. But in understanding that if something has been presented to the world for so long, we have to work as hard to change the perception of the people on what it is we are. So telling our stories, telling it on our terms, I think telling it in our languages. I feel for a long time we've been made to feel like vernacular is not something we should be proud of. We need to always be globalized and we always need to tell our stories where the world can understand. And it's just like, no, sometimes I just want to talk about something that happened in the village, and the only people who would understand it are the people who live around my grandma. So it's okay to tell that story also. Because in the same way, say we are all like no cap or period or whatever it is as part of our slang, but it came from America, and it's just like, why have we adopted that? What is it that we can do from our side that also gets into that? Like, there needs to be a bit more in exchange of what even culture is, so that it's not just we're receiving and getting nothing taken out. So I'm extremely passionate about us being able to tell our stories and on our own terms. On impact, I think the impact that I see Afripods having is like in the growth I've seen in podcasts in the last I've been in the space for over 5 years, just seeing the growth across the continent in the podcasting space. So like I mentioned before, we have awards now that are specifically for African podcasters that were created by an African in Nigeria. And she built a platform and she was like, this is what we're going to do. It's having like the South African Podcasters Guild, where South African podcasters came together and they were like, we need to find representation. What does that look like? And they came together and they got a guild going. It's in Cairo, having them at a university have every year have a pod fest and talk about podcasting and figure out what that looks like, you know. I think in impact, there's different things. It's the growth of podcasts, it's how many people are learning about it, it's the diversity in the type of podcast, because at first it was mostly talk podcasts, and now we're seeing people like this, the social newsroom, that's a podcast that was started by someone who was in traditional media in Kenya. His name is Mark Masai, and now he has a podcast that does news at that level. So it's the diversity in the stories that we're able to tell as well on the medium that I think is the true impact of it. Because like now we're seeing something like, as the protests are happening, people are translating the financial bill in Kenya into our languages, into vernacular, so that we can actually explain to our parents what it is that's happening, or explain to the people in the, and now being able to take something like that and put it as a podcast, because then it's able to be taken further with like as an audio thing. I think there's a lot of impact it can have. It's education for the people, it's telling our stories, it's just allowing people to exist, basically. So yeah.
That's a very that's a very cool answer, because you know when you say like the it's just basically telling the African story, the African kind of version. That's um and also like I think for us in Africa, there's a lot of news that maybe impacts Africa in a negative way, but it's not meant maybe to impact Africa even in a negative way, because there can be a lot of um, let's say there can be a lot of people who have their own perspective on Africa, but I guess on a day-to-day daily basis, there are also Africans living in Africa. So they basically Africans who are living in Africa, experiencing the everyday life of Africa. There's also like there are various ways that this kind of news does not affect them the way that it is being spoken. So being the bridge to that, and just showcasing like the real things that are going ongoing in Africa is a real kind of a cool thing to do, because now we can see um, not only people limited to maybe one country, but maybe to all African countries. So as you have said, people in Cairo, people in Nigeria, people in South Africa. So people can be able like now to share these ideas in a continent level, and maybe like get to know themselves better, because now it's not a point of like let's say Africa is poor, is like kind of a point of view where people are getting to know themselves in a more personalized kind of manner, where they can understand the real issues that are affecting Africa. So
True. Very true. And also humanizing the African experience, because I feel like sometimes it's the language that's used when talking about what it is that's happening. If there's like an explosion that's happened due to terrorism, it the language itself that's used versus if it happened in the West is very different. And a lot of times you'll find, I know it happened when we had the Dusit situation in Kenya, where we called out CNN and they had to apologize. And there was like a conference called by media houses to be like, you need to figure out how to talk about it. It's how they present, it's the pictures they're allowed to show. Where if it's an African or brown countries, let me say it that way, they'll show the bodies lying on the ground and everything. But if it's like in the West, it's like a building with the flags and the flowers. And it's just, how do we not get humanized in the same, it's the exact same situation. So I think it helps us, if we humanize ourselves, it allows other people to realize, I guess, that we are human, and then give us the exact same I guess grace or presentation or representation as well. Yeah.
Cool. So now this goes to Kasia. So what are you passionate about in medtech, and what impact in current what impact are you currently making, and what do you aim to impact in the future?
Yes, thank you. I am really passionate about two things. So one, I will follow up on the themes that you already talked about. I'm really passionate about creating a very diverse and global community in medtech and pharmaceutical startups, because creativity has no borders. That's point number one, and innovation has no borders. I think innovation can be created anywhere by anyone, and I think the more diversity we have in this global community, the more likely we are to actually come up with solutions that that are viable for and viable for more continents and more countries and more patients. So I always worked globally, by the way. Since I've joined the pharmaceutical and medical device industry, my jobs were always global. I was rarely, and maybe at the very beginning of my journey, I was responsible for a country or even a region. And then I always worked globally. So I saw with my own eyes how much we can achieve if we actually work in diverse teams across cultures. So I think that's one thing that I'm really passionate about, and I am building these global communities either by myself or through some other organizations that I work for. And then the second thing I'm really passionate about is what artificial intelligence can do for medicine. I think we are in a situation where many people are still a little bit afraid. They listen to media that sensationalize some potential downsides of AI, which I think we should take into consideration always. But I'd like to really communicate and project my enthusiasm about the future of medicine. And I think one aspect that is very important for me is to actually help eliminate some of the inequities that currently exist through AI and how it can manifest itself. For example, AI can make the highly specialized knowledge available to primary care. In how many places in the world we do not have enough specialists and we only rely on primary care? And yet these physicians and nurses who work in primary care through AI solutions can have access to highly expert opinions about different imaging diagnostic tools, different clinical guidelines, existing data. And this can so much enhance the way how we deliver and what kind of care we deliver to communities that currently don't have access to it. So I think that, and it is true for any continent. You know, in the United States, for example, we do have areas that we call medical deserts. These are places where people live and they have to drive for more than 1 hour, sometimes really much longer than that, to actually get any high quality care. But we can bring it to their homes and we can bring it to their nearby clinics by using different AI and new technology solutions like telehealth and wearables and things like that. So I actually see this revolution in medicine that will be happening across the entire world to really bring a lot of equity in how we practice medicine nowadays. And this will be, in my opinion, the biggest possible change that I am very happy to work toward.
So that was a really nice answer. I believe that that can be achieved in the future, and through the initiatives that are happening at the moment. This and also the technological advancements, and also the adoption going on. There's a lot of awareness on AI. So this is kind of a really nice solution. So I think we are running out of time, and we'll just come kind of like to us to wrap up things here. So I'm going to wrap up this with one final question. So what advice will you give to aspiring female entrepreneurs who are passionate about making a difference? So maybe we can start with you, Kasia.
I think probably the main advice is to develop resilience, because you will need it. And this is not only because a woman has a bit more difficult path, but any entrepreneur has a very difficult path in front of them. So work on your resilience. That's my advice.
Great. Let's go to Gathoni.
Okay, I'd have two things I'd tell them. One, you've been made to feel like your emotions or the emotional part of you is a bad thing. Use it as a strength, because there's strength in our emotion. And I feel like a lot of times as women, we're told to shut that part down in order to make it. Tap into it. There's a reason we're different. So use that, lead with that, because there's a strength in that. And two, be audacious. I feel like a lot of times we're very empathetic as women, and what will happen if, and I think we need to tap into what the men in the space have taught us. Be unapologetically audacious. So those would be my two things.
I can go. I think in terms of any entrepreneur, just keep doing what's working. Keep doing what the momentum is taking you towards. Just keep doing, because I think that we all often get caught up in our own minds and in our own doubts. But if it's physically working and if you feel the momentum of it, then just keep doing it. And in terms of women entrepreneurs, embrace your femininity confidently. Embrace the feminine side to you, even if it's shut down. Like, embrace it and use it as your biggest tool and as your biggest source of empowerment, is what I would say.
Cool.
I totally agree with what everyone said so far, and I would say that be confident, be really confident, and believe in yourself, because I think that's something we forget to do many times. And yeah, keep track of those great ideas that you have. Don't let them, disappear, because I'm sure that all of them are great, and try to make them reality.